Okay, so picking up from the last video, I'm going to go through the specific changes I'm expecting to make in this version of our checklist. So first I'll have a look at the Firestore database collections, things like changing community to teams, simplifying the structure of the categorization of checklists, and also looking at the new resource collection that I'm going to add. I'll also have a look at the overall user interface and some of the functionality that I'm expecting to tie to the different roles that we have in the system. Then finally I'll just have a look at getting started on using fbmStarter template, Angular template, and adding the first parts of our checklists into that template to get going. Okay, let's have a look at the changes I'm going to make to Firestore. So this is the original Firestore collection of documents. So see, before I had communities and I had themes, and then under that categories. So let's have a look at the new one. So just going through this, so you see up here, instead of community, I'm using the term teams because this is now focused on being an enterprise application instead of a whole internet application. Teams makes more sense. Usually in enterprises we work in teams. A lot of times teams are aligned with departments, and checklists can be aligned with a certain team as well. For the content management categorization, now the top level is just categories, so there's no themes anymore, and checklists align with categories as well. Under categories, you see we have activities. So activities are things that happen within categories and can be used for categorization of checklist items, and this is useful for metrics. So again, say we're doing have a category of software design or software development, and under that we may have an activity of requirements management. So we may just have checklist items called out in a checklist, so not all the checklist items may have something to do with requirements management, and then by having that tagging we can do reports on across a bunch of checklists, but just on activities to do with requirements management. One thing to notice, I'm using this dark arrow here to represent that something's a sub-collection. So last year Firestore didn't have a way of putting one index over sub-collections of other collections, but now you do. I can just have a index over all activities. I can have an index over, in this case, all checklist items. So by doing that, it now allows me to align these sub-collections correctly under the parent collection, while still being able to do reporting across all the items in those sub-collections. Okay, another change here. You see I've added a collection called resources. This is something I didn't have in the original version. It's something I meant to put in. So the idea is that there can be supporting material or collateral that you want to point to from either checklist or checklist items. So again, thinking about software development and requirements, you may have instructions for how a certain aspect of requirements management is done, and you can point to that information by pointing to the resource that represents that information. So it could be all sorts of things. So we see down here, it could be a URL, so it could even be external URL out on, say, a Wikipedia article on how to do requirements management. It could be a YouTube video. It could be a specific file, so maybe it's a form that's used in requirements management. It can be just a note done as in Markdown language, and it could also just be an image. So, and this can be expanded. So as I think of new resource types, I can expand it. So mainly the resource type is used for working out how that resource gets displayed when users looking at a list of resources. So for example, YouTube Video you usually want to display as like a snapshot of the YouTube video. URL you usually just want to display as a URL or URL name. So there's different ways of displaying these, and the type will help us decide which way to do it. Another thing I've done for resources is started a version of versioning here. I may have to build on that as I go along, but the idea that a resource can have various status. It can be active, it can be superseded, or it can be inactive. So if it's superseded, then some other resource will point to this supersedes ID of the resource that was superseded, so we can track through versions that way. We'll see how that goes. Something else to note here is this note here, and this is something I did through the first version. I think I'll try and use it everywhere here. You see in the documents I have things like managers, and the manager information or reference is made up of the ID to the user ID of that manager, but also pulls in the display name. So that's kind of denormalized, but it's useful for, especially in a NoSQL database, and the way this we want to optimize the performance is have all the information that you need for at least one level of showing a document in the document. So dereferencing things like the ID and the name of that ID, category ID and the name of that category. So it's going to make it easier to display these, list these things without having to do the relational thing of pulling the name across. So that's what my note here is I'll add functions to Firestore, where if something like a category name changes, that it goes through and updates the name wherever that category is used to keep this information up to date. So again, NoSQL version of working with data, where instead of using relationships, update it in place. And final note here about the Firestore structure here is it's mainly used, or at least initially it's going to be used in my new version of our checklists when developing the models. So I'm going to take the definition of what these things contain, the properties of these different documents, and they become my model definitions as well as my enums and definitions, type definitions for some of these objects. So build the model first, and then because I'm working on Angular, TypeScript will make sure that I'm using the types correctly, both for the documents and for the properties of those documents. We also see under the user collection that users can be assigned a role, either a team role or whether they're a system administrator. So the team roles can be manager, member, or reviewer. So let's have a look at how that aligns with functionality. So this is kind of a graphical racy. It doesn't go as deep as a racy, but gives you an idea of what can be done by the different roles. So rolling across these lanes here, we see for team members, and team members are the people who mainly use and fill out the checklists. And just note that a team manager is also a team member, so it can do most of the same thing, or can do the same things that a team member can do for their assigned checklists as well. So just running through these, you can do things like review and update your own checklists that are assigned to you. You can create a new checklist, you can print, save, mail those checklists, you can manage resources that you are the owner of, and you can create a checklist from a template. So if we go further down, we see some of these functions are repeated for the team manager. Like I said, the team manager is also a team member, and calling out these functions here also helps me do the component design, because a lot of these will be implemented either as one component or maybe a combination of components. So it may be like a listing of, say, checklists, and then edit page for a certain checklist. So this gives me some guidance to what components I need. Running through here, team manager can do much of the things that a team member can do, but as well they can do things like convert a checklist to a template. They can still create resources. They can do, so this is something new, a team manager can do data analysis over the checklists that his team is or teams has created. They can assign a checklist, so this is a little different from just a team member. So say a team manager, which may be not necessarily a department manager, it could be someone like a project manager, could be a scrum lead. So they can go in, and even if a team member has created a checklist, may assign it to one or more other team members as well. They can review checklists, so check that the checklists are being completed on time, and also manage the resources owned by the team. The next role is team reviewer. So the idea here is this may be someone external to the team, especially again if we're talking about departments, maybe someone in another department, or maybe a much higher manager, maybe a VP or something, wanting to go and view what's happening in the departments or teams that roll up to that manager. So some of the things a team reviewer can do is still review checklists in the teams that he or she's a reviewer for, can do data analysis across checklists in all those teams, and still do print, save, mail checklists. And finally, the other sort of user is not related to any of the content or checklists, is the system administrator who can manage users. So in this system and in the earlier our checklist system, is someone first has to register with the system, so set up their log-on method and get a user account in there, but they cannot do anything by default. They're not a member of a team or anything like that. So the administrator needs to be informed so that they can go and promote that user to an active user, and then they can start doing sort of the normal activities that their role would allow them to do. So now I'll have a look at how I first set up our checklist. So like I said, I'm going to use the fbmStarter Angular project is the one that I've been using all along, so they'll sort of accelerate what I'm doing, give me all the basics for an Angular project. So I'll do that. I'll pull over some of the initial content from the old ourChecklists, so some of the graphics, especially the splash page, and then we should be good to go in the future blog videos to talk about specific things that I'm implementing. So I'm going to make my ourChecklists GitHub project first, and I'm going to base it on the fbmStarter project that I created a while ago. I've been starting all my Angular projects using this starter projects. I've set up this fbmStarter project, so it's under GitHub submervda fbmStarter as a template, and so from that template I can create a new GitHub project which I'm going to call ourChecklists. The instructions for doing this are down here, so I'm going to basically follow these instructions, and in the next video I think I'm going to go through the steps. It's going to be a few steps to get through this, and then take it as far as getting the splash page done for my new ourChecklists project. So you'll see in the next videos I'm going to go into GitHub and here create the new project. Also going to go into Firebase and create our Checklists Firebase project as the starter project, because I'm going to need the ID information to bring into my fbmStarter or into my ourChecklists Angular project. And I'll just follow through these instructions, which are things like doing global replaces of names to get the new name in there. I'm also going to have to create some icons and things like that for our checklists, but hopefully I can use some of the ones I created for the initial version of this project. And that should be it. So I should be able to go through all that in the next video.